Hey guys, what's going on? Shaw here, and today in this video we're going to be taking a look at the Protection Warrior. Now this is so far my favorite build on beta up to this point. Blizzard with their last build actually put out a few nerfs that was affecting a lot of damage centered around the ability Revenge, and as well as some of the raid generation. So going into this build I was a little nervous, but Warrior seems to be better than ever. Now I will say, while damage is always fun to see a tank do, and that is sometimes why a tank might be fun to some people, the reason why this build has been so good so far is actually the fluidity as well as the adaptability of the talent tree. So join me today while we walk through exactly what the warrior tree has going on and how it plays in dungeons. Let's dive in. Of course, we have your typical disclaimer for the talent build. Things are always subject to change when addressing beta, and what's beautiful about the warrior tree and what is absolutely gold standard for almost, this should be the case for every class, is the trees allow for a ton of different builds. I have had a lot of warriors come through both my stream chat and in Discord and on YouTube recommend running a ton of different stuff, whether it's different capstones like Spear of Bastion or Shockwave, or things like Sidearm, or running Ravager in the actual spec tree. There are so many builds that they're all fun to play, it's flexible. And of course, once we can actually start testing harder content, we're going to be able to figure out one build is going to be great for this dungeon or this raid fight, but then we have a totally different build for another raid fight, or based on the affixes. The warrior tree is pretty much, I would say, like perfect. There's obviously maybe some bugs and some tuning that has to be addressed, but for the most part, that's why the tree is so amazing. So this is the build that I have been running, and it's probably by far my favorite so far. You have a good balance of rotation and cooldowns. There's a lot of synergy, and there's a great feedback loop, both with your mitigation as well as your offensive toolkit. Let's quickly kind of go through exactly what's going on. If we step over to the class tree, of course, the idea with this build is to optimize damage, and the reason why we're optimizing damage is because it's going to feed into our defensive kit in a bit, but let me get to that in a second. So the idea with this is, let's try to focus on a little bit of leech. We're obviously going to be playing the Thunderclap bleed build, which has been pretty popular on beta. I know there are builds that don't focus on bleeds, like things like Rend and Blood Surge, but in this build in particular, we're going to be focusing on that. So we're grabbing something like Siphoning Strikes, and later in the tree, we're also grabbing something like One-Handed Specialization. These two things together are giving us a flat 10% leech, which is insanely good for warriors. Now, of course, lower level content, we're not taking as much damage, but in theory, when we do start taking damage, we have things like Indomitable, we have things like Ignore Pain that are creating like a shield, and Leech is going to come in handy, especially when you bake in the fact that we're, applying Roar, that we have a little bit of burst damage, that we have things like Rend and Blood Surge and our Deep Wounds, all doing damage constantly. The Leech aspect of this build is really, really fun, and I'm hoping they don't touch it, but I'm sure it's going to get nerfed, especially once we start testing Mythic Plus. Now, the idea of this build is we're grabbing some different revenge talents, things like Frothing Berserker, which is going to give us Rage Refund. We're going to grab things like Barbaric Training, which is going to give us Amplified Revenges, and of course things like Seismic Reverberation, which is going to, when we're hitting multiple targets, Revenge is going to hit an additional time. And then the bulk of the build is actually to come down towards the middle and then swinging left on the tree. So we're seeing things like Thunderclap and of course Blood and Thunder to make sure that we're spreading our Rend. Now, I wouldn't play Blood and Thunder if you're not playing Rend, but in this build in particular, Blood and Thunder is the way to go. And now we're maneuvering our way down to the left side of the tree to grab things like Armored to the Teeth and things like Avatar and of course Unstoppable Force, giving us more Thunderclaps while in that avatar window, and of course reducing the cooldown, which means that we can apply Rend. So in larger pools, Unstoppable Force tends to typically be the play, especially when you look at the damage breakdown. Thunderclap makes up a good bit of our damage. It's actually typically my top damage. I am playing Thunderous Roar, but there are arguments to be made for Spear of Bastion, and again, that's the beauty of this tree. You can drop Thunderous Roar completely and some other of these talents to try to pick up Shockwave if you need it as a utility. You can also play Spear of Bastion and Shockwave if you want utility. You can play Shockwave and Thunderous Roar if you would like. That's what I love about the capstone of the tree. The warrior has just an excellent choice and a lot of flexibility. You can drop like Barbaric Training for Sidearm for more passive damage. If you need a little bit more group utility, you can go Sidearm into Commanding Shout instead. And then you can come down here to grab Shockwave, and you can grab your Avatar, and you can still grab Thunderous Roar and go One-Handed Spec with some room to spare. So there's a lot of flexibility in this tree, and that's kind of the beauty of it, and that's what I'm really trying to stress. Now, moving over to the spec tree, the focus here is really on rage generation and kind of burst, cooldown, DPS, maintaining avatar, stuff like that. So there's a lot of cool feedback loops that are going on here. We're going to be going to both sides of the tree, and then we're going to be focusing on the left hand / middle capstones. Things like Last Stand paired with Unnerving Focus and Bolster give us this nice little reduced cooldown on our Last Stand, and Last Stand is going to increase our rage generation by 50% during that 15 seconds, and it's going to give us shield block. So this is going to give us a little bit of time to recover our shield block charges, because of course with lower amounts of haste, our shield block charges are take a little bit longer to recover. We're also going to be grabbing things like Brutal Vitality, which adds our damage, adds to our Ignore Pain, which is insanely nice, because what this does is, at least in this level content, it's adding to the Ignore Pain shield, so we don't have to keep reapplying that shield over and over again. So we're allowed to spend a little bit more rage on Revenge, which of course is feeding into the Frothing Berserker refund, and that's resulting in more damage and just kind of more overall rage spending. And lastly, we are grabbing Bloodborne down here, which is going to increase the bleed effects by about 30%. Now you can drop one of these if you'd like to just run the 15% damage increase on those bleeds, and maybe you could pick up something like Ravager, you could pick up something like Battle-Scarred Veteran, or you can pick up things like The Wall or Unbreakable Will. All very cool talents, and that's what I love about this tree so much, is that there are so many options and flexibility to kind of like make little adaptive changes to whatever type of content you're doing. Now, of course, this is again in heroic content, so it's hard to test the survivability aspect, but when it comes to synergy, this is just a nice little build. And then going down the middle of the tree, we are grabbing things like Rend, we're grabbing Blood Surge for the rage generation, we have Shield Wall and Anger Management to reduce the cooldown of both Shield Wall and Avatar. And then of course, we're seeing the things like Outburst, Indomitable, and Booming Voice. This is such an attractive capstone area of the tree. I don't know how you would ever not play with these. Obviously, Thunderclap Shield Slam, generating more rage, granting Ignore Pain, and doing more damage. Insane. Obviously, healing for the rage you spend. Being a rage-based funnel build, you're getting a lot of rage, therefore you're spending a lot of rage, and you're getting refund on rage, so it's just like turning into healing again. Incredible. And of course, Booming Voice is allowing you to deal more damage, it's generating rage. Amazing. And now kind of the most enjoyable part about this build is kind of like the burst DPS you're gaining from things like Shield Charge, Battering Ram, and Champion's Bulwark. So the idea of this build is to go in, Avatar Demo Shout, get your Rend going, get your Thunderclap, and then you go for a very juicy fucking Shield Charge that just nukes everything. And obviously it does a lot of damage to your primary target. It also stuns your primary target. It increases your critical strike chance and damage by 15%. Super fun. So then you can go, at this point, you go into a Thunderous Roar for burst, and it's increasing your auto attack speed, which results in more rage, which results in more shield slams, which results in more rage. And it's just this very nice little feedback. And of course, the shield charge will also give you shield block. So you can utilize this as another way to have that better uptime. So that's where the min-maxy nature of like having weak auras and obviously practicing the build comes from. So I know I sound super excited because I am. This build is really fun. Probably going to get nerfed, let's be honest. But let's jump into a Brackenhide Hollow and just take a couple looks at some of these different pulls and just how insane this damage profile is. Let's go. So right here, we're finishing up a pull. And while our healer is DC, that's not going to stop me from continuing my pull. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to charge in, apply our Rend to make sure I'm able to spread it around with some Thunderclaps. We put up our shield wall, we pop Avatar, we pop Demo Shout, we shield charge, and then we use that buff from it to get a massive Thunderous Roar, which puts us all the way up at 150k burst DPS. And this is pretty much able to be done roughly every minute because of all the different cooldowns that we're working with, but we're pretty much going to be setting things on cooldown. So it's extremely, extremely fun. Even without all of those CDs up, I'm still able to maintain like 80k DPS, which is just absolutely bonkers right now. Again, the excitement about this build is the synergy, but it's also, you know, partly the damage, I will admit. Being able to just out DPS everyone the whole dungeon is kind of cracked. I will be honest though, I spent a lot of time during this, during the last night or the last evening or today, basically before I started recording this, gearing the absolute living shit out of this character. I have basically full 392 gear in almost every slot outside of like maybe like I think my cloak and one of my rings. I'm also like fully enchanted, fully decked out. I have all my battle potions as well. I'm all gemmed up and everything. So I do a lot of damage because I spent the time actually trying to get that gear. And you're going to see quick in a short second here, I end up actually doing a ton of damage with things like a Helm effect, with an enchant, and with a like file / potion. So Our healer finally left the group, and actually we ended up getting automatic Jack into our dungeon run. So what's up, Jack? He's an outstanding healer main. A lot of you might know him from, you know, him casting the MDI and stuff like that. So really cool, down to earth guy, but it was kind of cool to see him in this dungeon. So let's quickly jump to the end and we'll talk about the damage breakdown. So the overall damage for this dungeon is looking something like this. We see Thunderclap Revenge, followed by a lot of our bleed dots, then followed by Shield Slam, of course, Close Authority Shield Charge, and Melee. Of course, I should point out some of the more glaring standouts that people might have questions about. So obviously Bloody Vengeance. This is a helmet buff from our blacksmithing crafting profession. So this is just doing an absurd amount of damage. I can't imagine it'll go live like this, but still really fun to play with. Basically, every time something damages me, it's applying a bleed to said target that just deals damage over time. And it obviously is insane. The average hit is about 5k per tick, with some of my crits being obviously like 10k. Glacial Fury is actually a consumable, so that's probably standing out pretty heavily here. And then of course Shield Charge. This thing is a massive fucking nuke. I love hitting this button, and it's so fun in this build in particular. But again, our Thunderclap and Revenge damage is a little healthier. Our uptime on Ignore Pain was about 87%, which is pretty solid. This is going to happen whenever we happen to get Outburst or apply it ourselves, and it's getting extended by some of the different talents that we use. So Ignore Pain is really easy to have, and Shield Block uptime is about 54%. Again, I'm not hitting it as frequently, mainly because it's low level content. So until we start being able to test high level content like Mythic Plus or Raid, where it's really going to be hard to get a grasp on exactly how much Shield Block uptime we have. And of course, without weak ores, it's a little hard to keep track of Shield Block charges without having to like look down at my action bar every time, and maximizing that along with things like Last Stand and the talent bolster. So extremely fun build to play with the shield charge. It's absolutely fun to have like a little AoE nuke. We're opting out of a lot of the right hand side talents now. I have seen builds with Ravager, which I just don't like the button bloating. I don't like when we have a ton of random buttons to hit that are cool, either whether it's cooldown based or defensive based or even rotational. Ravager is more of a cooldown, but having an extra button to hit just kind of feels clunky. I like to just really go in and get rolling right away, and having sustained damage as a tank always feels better than having to rely on CDs to do a lot of damage. This is why Guardian Druid is such a anomaly of a tank, because it's one of the only tanks currently on live servers that really focuses on the incarnation cooldown, and outside of that you do almost no damage. So more preferably we like to actually have, you know, sustain. So give this build a shot. Obviously it's going to, there's no way this doesn't get nerfed. There's no way. And most of it's actually coming from functional things in the warrior toolkit. We're seeing things like basically item effects and, potions and enchantments making up a fair bit of our damage here. So unfortunately, it would be nice to see these get nerfed. Now, I'm a big advocate for having, things like potions and different weapon effects do a lot of damage, but Blizzard, unfortunately, learned their lesson, I think, in BFA when our, Azurite traits and our essences were doing most of our damage, and it really didn't feel fun because you were really playing, your essences and not your class. Regardless, though, this build is extremely fluid. It's very fun. It's hard to point out the downsides of the spec, mainly because we're taking pretty much no damage. The overall healing was mostly me. Automatic Jack was in this dungeon, so that was fun. But he almost had to do no healing either, because I just it didn't take any damage. He actually healed everyone more than me. That's kind of crazy. All right, one last time, I can't stress it enough. This build really comes down to not only the damage, but the fluidity of the spec and the adaptability, of course, in the talent tree. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you guys so much for all the support that you guys have been showing me on Twitch. And of course, huge shout out to all my patrons who support me with their actual real life money. It means the world to me. It provides me coffee so I can actually sound energetic sometimes. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what tank you guys want me to do next, and I will catch you all in the next one. Take care.